Ever feel like, the world's kind of running on this, like, preset script? One you never really agreed to?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, today we're going deep on a guy who, well, he kind of ripped up that script and wrote his own. Congressman Thomas Massie.
Yeah, he's a fascinating case study for sure. Republican, but with these like super libertarian leanings.
Definitely not afraid to go against the grain.
Not at all, even when it means like taking on his own party or these like really powerful lobbying groups.
And we're not just talking about policy debates here. This guy lives totally off the grid. Like, 1,500-acre farm in Kentucky. Built his own house, powers it with a salvaged Tesla battery.
It's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, even heats it with wood he gathers himself.
He's like taking self-sufficiency to a whole new level. Timber-framed house, built it all from trees he salvaged after an ice storm, stone he dug from his own property, wood gasification boiler that runs on deadfall. It's incredible.
It's wild. I mean, you got to wonder if that, like, hands-on, super independent spirit kind of fuels his whole approach to politics, too.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, this guy once fixed a broken well pump using just a power drill. So resourceful.
Totally. When you're that used to relying on yourself, figuring things out, building your own solutions, it's bound to shape how you see the world.
And in Massie's case, how he sees government.
For sure.
Which brings us to one of the most interesting parts of Massie's political career, honestly. His stance on foreign aid, especially when it comes to Israel. This is where he's really, I don't know, like ruffled some feathers, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Majorly, especially within his own party.
And to understand this, I guess we've got to talk about AIPAC.
Right. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It's this powerful lobbying group, advocates for pro-Israel policies in the U.S. government. And they've had, well, let's just say they've had some interesting interactions with Congressman Massie.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the deal there?
So when Massie was first running for Congress, AIPAC actually asked him to write a white paper outlining his views on Israel. And get this, when he kind of hesitated, they basically offered to let him copy Rand Paul's.
Wait, seriously? They wanted him to just, like, parrot talking points?
Yeah, it kind of gives you a glimpse into how some of these lobbying groups work, trying to shape the narrative, influence politicians. And when Massie refused to play ball, well, let's just say they didn't exactly take it well.
So what'd they do?
Negative ads, whisper campaigns, you name it.
Wow, it's kind of crazy they went all out like that. But Massie's never actually said anything negative about Israel itself, right? His position is more about, like, his opposition to foreign aid in general.
That's a key distinction. He's consistently voted against sending billions of dollars overseas, no matter which country. His argument is that the U.S. is, drowning in debt, and we need to take care of our own problems first. It's a fiscally conservative view for sure, but it's definitely put him at odds with AIPAC and others who see supporting Israel as, well, non-negotiable.
So it's less about taking sides in the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict and more about Massie's broader philosophy of limited government, fiscal responsibility. And this ties into another concept that Massie talks about a lot, this uniparty system.
Right.
I've heard him mention it, but I'm not sure I totally get it. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. So basically, Massie's saying there's often more agreement between the establishment wings of both the Republican and Democratic parties than there is between them and their own bases. You know what I mean?
Okay.
In other words, there's kind of this uniparty in Washington that's more interested in protecting its own interests than actually representing the people.
Interesting. So he's saying, despite all the partisan fighting we see on the surface, there's this deeper level where the establishment from both parties are kind of working together.
Yeah, and often in ways that benefit, well, special interests and lobbyists.
So he sees AIPAC's influence as a prime example of how this whole uniparty system works.
Absolutely. He's even said that pretty much every congressman seems to have an AIPAC person they talk to regularly.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim. So for Massie, it's not just about foreign aid. It's about, who's really calling the shots in Washington.
Right.
And whether our elected officials are actually, representing their constituents or if they're beholden to these powerful lobbying groups.
100%. It's a question a lot of people are asking. It makes you wonder, how much influence do these groups actually have? And are our elected officials really independent?
Yeah, good questions. And to be fair, Massie doesn't just, point fingers. He's actually taken action. Remember his involvement in the motion to vacate Speaker Mike Johnson?
Oh, yeah, that was big. Massie argued that Johnson's policies were basically the same as the Democrats.
Right.
It was like proving his point about the uniparty. And the crazy thing is, some Democrats actually supported Johnson, even though he was a Republican,
Why would they do that?
because he was pushing their agenda.
So we've got this picture of Thomas Massie, right? This guy who lives off the grid, builds everything himself, and brings that same independent spirit to Congress. Not afraid to stand alone, challenge the status quo, even take on powerful lobbies like AIPAC.
Yeah, and it all seems to come from this like deep-seated belief in individual liberty and limited government and this commitment to putting America first. He's definitely one of a kind in Washington.
Yeah, that's for sure. But he's also a reminder that there is still politicians out there who are willing to, like, buck the system, speak their minds, and really fight for what they believe in, even if it means facing, the wrath of some pretty powerful special interests.
You got that right. It's really interesting.
Okay, so we've painted this picture of Massie, right? This like self-reliant engineer taking on the system. But how effective can that really be long term? I mean, Washington can be tough for people who don't play the game.
Right. That's the question, isn't it? Like, is Massie a model for a real path? Or is he just going to be this lone voice out there? I actually think his story gives us some clues.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, first off, despite all the attempts to like sideline him, Massie keeps getting reelected. In fact, last primary, he won by a landslide.
That's true.
That says something, right? About his connection with the voters back home.
Yeah, it does. It's like there's this appetite for authenticity, for politicians who, stand up for what they believe in, even when it's not popular. Maybe people are just tired of the same old political games.
I think that's a huge part of it. And Massie's story also tacks into this, classic American ideal. Self-reliance, charting your own course, not being beholden to anyone. That resonates with a lot of folks.
It's true. And for Massie, that self-reliance isn't just talk, right? I mean, the guy built his own house, uses renewable energy, grows food. It's like he's living proof that you don't have to be dependent on the system.
100%. And he brings that same energy to politics, not afraid to get into the nitty-gritty, challenge how things are usually done, whether it's questioning foreign aid or like pointing out problems with how laws are made. He's always pushing for transparency.
It's funny. We talked about that whole hot water heater story earlier. The one where he installs a used one in the county jail.
Yeah.
With help from the inmates.
I know.
Sounds almost too good to be true. Like something made up for a campaign ad.
Right. But that's Massie. He's not your typical politician. He's a guy who's not afraid to get his hands dirty, to think outside the box.
Refreshing, compared to all the carefully crafted images we see in Washington.
Yeah.
It's like real change comes from unexpected places, from people who aren't afraid to challenge how things are done and think differently.
Absolutely. Massie shows us we don't have to accept the system's limits. We can find ways to work within it, push for change, and hold those in power accountable.
I'm also curious, though, about his effectiveness in actually building coalitions, getting things done. I mean, he's so independent, even a bit of a maverick. Can you really achieve anything in Washington if you're constantly bucking the trend?
I get that, yeah. It's true that his independence has sometimes made it harder to, build consensus. But he's also shown he's willing to work with the other side on issues where there's common ground.
Yeah, like that time he got AOC to vote with him on a bill. That was wild, considering how different their politics are.
Right. It shows he's not just about, making a scene or being ideologically pure. He'll engage with people he disagrees with, find common ground, build those bridges.
And it's interesting that it seems to tie back to his whole belief in the Constitution, the principles of limited government. It's not about party, it's about upholding those core values.
For sure. And I think that's where his appeal comes from for a lot of people. He's seen as someone who's not driven by politics or ambition, but by a genuine desire to uphold the Constitution, to serve his constituents.
It's a powerful message, especially in a political climate that can feel, kind of cynical. Massie's story offers some hope, a reminder that principled leadership is still out there. So we've seen how his off-grid lifestyle, that independent streak, and his unwavering belief in the Constitution have shaped his career. What about other issues? I mean, foreign policy, the uniparty system, those are big. But what else is he known for?
Well, one area where he's been super vocal is government surveillance. He's a huge defender of privacy rights and a really vocal critic of programs like FISA,
Right.
which he thinks give the government way too much power to spy on citizens.
That makes sense. It's like a natural extension of his libertarian views, his whole belief in limited government. If you're building your own world off the grid, you're probably not thrilled about the government watching you.
Exactly. He sees digital privacy as this essential part of freedom in the 21st century. He's argued that the government's overreach into our digital lives is a threat to our freedom and our democracy.
And he's not just talking. Remember that time he single-handedly delayed that huge spending bill, the CARES Act, just because he insisted on a quorum for the vote?
Oh, yeah, that was so Massie. He knew it would make him unpopular, even with his own party, but he was like, nope, gotta follow the rules. He saw it as a matter of principle, protecting how Congress works.
He's constantly reminding everyone that the Constitution matters, that rules exist for a reason. We shouldn't just accept the loss of our freedoms, even for the sake of convenience or security.
It's powerful, and it resonates with a lot of people worried about government power and the erosion of individual rights.
So we've got this picture of Massie, right? The principled defender of liberty, the guy who'll stand up to anyone, even his own party, to protect the Constitution and people's rights.
It's a compelling image. It challenges what we think of when we think politician. Massie doesn't seem driven by power, ambition, or even the need to be liked.
Yeah, it's like he's driven by something much deeper.
A set of core values he'll defend no matter what.
And honestly, that's what makes him so fascinating in American politics today. He's a reminder that integrity, principles, they still matter, even in a system that often seems to reward the opposite. But it's not all, like, serious policy debates with Massie. He also has this, I don't know, like, mischievous side. A sense of humor.
Yeah.
He's willing to make fun of himself, of how absurd politics can be.
Oh, absolutely. Remember his Christmas card photo? The one that went viral?
Okay.
Him and his family all dressed up, posing with guns?
Yeah.
Classic mess.
So classic. It was controversial, of course, but it also showed he doesn't take himself too seriously.
Right.
He's not afraid to ruffle some feathers, with a little bit of provocative humor.
Totally. It was a poke at the gun control folks, reminding everyone that the Second Amendment is really important to a lot of Americans, but it was also done with this, like, wink and a smile.
Yeah, like, lighten up, people.
Exactly. And I think that's something people like about him. He's not just a policy wonk, you know? He's a real person. He has a sense of humor. He's willing to poke fun at the establishment. It makes him relatable, even if you disagree with him on things.
Totally. And that's so important in a politician, especially these days. Being able to laugh at yourself, find the humor in it all. It's humbling. You can break down barriers, help you connect with people just as, like, human beings.
So we've got Massie, right?
Right.
The off-grid engineer, the constitutionalist, the maverick, but also a family man, someone with a sense of humor, a guy who challenges the way things are, whether it's through how he lives, how he votes, or even his Christmas cards.
It's a fascinating picture. It really makes you think about American politics, individual action, and what it means to be a leader with principles.
But what does it all mean in the big picture? Is Massie a sign of things to come? Or is he going to stay an outlier? Just a voice shouting into the void? That's the question we're going to explore in the last part of our deep dive. We'll look at the bigger context of Massie's story, what American democracy is facing, and if real change is even possible in a system that seems to resist it.
Okay, so we've really gotten to know Thomas Massie, this off-grid engineer turned, political maverick. But let's zoom out for a sec. What does his story tell us about the bigger picture? Like, about American politics today?
That's a good point, yeah. It's easy to get lost in the specifics, but there are bigger takeaways here, I think. Lessons that go way beyond just one politician or policy debate.
Yeah, it feels like Massie is, I don't know, like a symptom of something bigger. This, like, growing discontent with how Washington works. This feeling that the system is kind of rigged against the average person,
You're right. I think that's exactly it. Massie's popularity, even though he takes some controversial stances, it tells us something. People want authenticity in politics. They want leaders who are, like, real, who speak their minds and challenge the status quo, even if it means going against their own party or, powerful groups.
And that whole thing about the uniparty system, the idea that the establishment wings of both parties are more similar to each other than they are to the people they're supposed to represent, that really resonates with a lot of people.
It does, yeah. It taps into that frustration with how things work or don't work in Washington, this feeling that the system protects itself, keeps things the same, no matter what people actually want or need.
And Massie's not afraid to take on the powerful, whether it's his own party leaders, lobbies like AI PAC, or even the intelligence community with his whole fight against government surveillance. People want someone to shake things up, hold those in power accountable.
Absolutely. He's not afraid to be the one dissenting voice, even if it means people make fun of him, push him out, or hit him with attack ads. That kind of courage, standing up for what you believe in, even when it's not popular. People admire that, even if they don't agree with him on everything.
It's like he's from a different time in American politics, when politicians were more willing to, stand on principle, fight the system, and put their constituents first instead of their own ambitions.
There's definitely that feeling, but Massie is also very much a product of, right now. His success really reflects how divided we are politically and how little people trust institutions these days.
Right, it's not just about him. He's part of a bigger trend, a symbol of how polarized we are and how much trust has eroded in the political system.
Yeah, exactly. And the issues he focuses on, government overreach, individual liberty, fiscal responsibility, those really resonate with a lot of voters, especially those who feel like the political establishment has forgotten about them.
It's interesting because his story also says something about how real change often starts locally, with individuals taking action. Here's this guy, built his whole world off-grid, and then brought that same spirit to Washington.
You know, that's something we haven't really talked about. The philosophy behind his off-grid lifestyle. It's not just about practicality. It says something about how he sees the world, his belief in individual action, and his skepticism of authority.
That's a good point. Building your own house, your own power, growing your own food, it's like this rejection of relying on systems and institutions. It's about taking control.
And that mindset, that self-reliance and independence, it's in everything he does, his policies, how he interacts with other politicians. It's like he's always thinking, why should I depend on someone else when I can do it myself?
And that can be both inspiring and frustrating, right? Inspiring because it shows what one person can do, how they can challenge the way things are, but frustrating because it can also mean an unwillingness to compromise, to work with the system, to make real change.
Yeah, that's the tension we see throughout Massie's career. His principled, an individualist, not afraid to go it alone, but that can make it hard to build coalitions to get things done in a system that's all about compromise.
He's always pushing the boundaries, testing how far an independent voice can go in a system that rewards everyone being the same.
And that makes him, both fascinating and kind of a warning. He shows that you can challenge the system, be a voice for the unheard. But he also shows how hard it is to make lasting change without allies, without working within the existing structures.
So what does this mean for the future of American politics? Is Massie the way forward, or will he always be an outsider?
That's the big question. I think his story gives us hope, but also some realism. Hope because it shows people want authenticity, principled leaders, someone to challenge the status quo. But realism because it also shows how hard it is to change things when you're outside the norms, in a system that often resists change.
It's like the struggle between wanting things to be different and how stuck the system is. The pull of individual conscience versus the pressure to conform.
And that's a struggle we're going to keep seeing in American politics.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Thomas Massie. It's been a fascinating journey getting to know this really unique guy.
I agree, it has. He's complex, contradictory, a man of principle who can also be really stubborn, a self-reliant individualist who's also deeply involved in politics.
And I think his story, even with all its ups and downs, tells us something important about American politics today, about the challenges we face and what's possible when it comes to change.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some things to think about, maybe even inspired you to find your own ways to make a difference.